Well, hello everyone, and welcome on for me. It's early Sunday morning, and for my guest, Liudmila, what time is it there in Estonia?
It's 3 o'clock,
So
3 p.m.
3 p.m. in the afternoon. So welcome and good afternoon to Liudmila, Bruce, my wonderful guest. Um, I have the honor of interviewing her today. As I noted, she's coming to me from lovely Estonia. I personally have never been there, sorry, but only heard wonderful things. I, of course, am P.L. Stewart. This is the John Kingdom Saga, my YouTube channel. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing a fabulous author. You can see her book up on the screen. I wish I had a copy, but I plan to get one soon, like a physical copy, because you know how I love physical books. And but I had the privilege of reading her first book. I have an ARC, electronic ARC. It was fantastic. It was surprising, and we're hopefully going to talk about that with Ludmila and I about her book. But yes, thank you so much, Ludmila, for joining us, and welcome.
Uh, yes, I want to say hello to you, to everyone who watches us. You're fantastic people, and thanks for organizing this interview.
Well, it has been my pleasure. So, um, first of all, I would like to just maybe delve in a bit to your background in terms of your writing journey and how you became a writer, and what is it like to write science fiction, which I would categorize your book is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, and or fantasy in Estonia, where you're living. What is the how did you become a writer? What made you want to write science fiction specifically?
hmm Okay, first of all, I wasn't born in Estonia. I was born in Russia. Yes, and I've been surrounded by books. Yes, since my early days, everyone in my family loved reading. My grandpa had a vast collection of books of different types. He enjoyed reading historical novels, for example. And of course, I enjoyed reading since childhood. For example, uh, books on history too, like my granddad. Books about nature. I even thought about becoming a biologist. Yes, nature. It has also always enchanted me, and I've always enjoyed spending time outdoors, looking for some unusual plants, animals, and birds, and it was a pleasure to read about this. But soon I got this interest in writing stories, not only writing but inventing them in my mind and uh, telling them right away to someone who was ready to read, to listen, or even not ready. um, so this storytelling, it followed me all my life long. And I started writing something at about maybe 6 or 7 years old.
So that
Mm.
long, so you've been writing that long. So when it comes to science fiction specifically, which is what you write, were there authors that influenced you, either Russian authors or Western authors, non-Western authors that made you? Um, I know you mentioned you thought about potentially going to that field in terms of your line of work, but were there authors that you read that also influenced you in that regard?
Mm. Sure. As for the Russian authors, these were Strugatsky brothers. They wrote out Picnic. Maybe you even read it. Ivan Yefremov, and um, as we speak about Western authors, it is Tolkien, though he's not saying science fiction. He's yes, he's fantasy author. Edgar Burroughs, about with his Martian Chronicles. Arthur Clarke.
Okay. Those are some big authors that you mentioned, both Russian and more Western. So yeah, those are some big authors. One thing that I am always fascinated about, because I have not traveled nearly as much as I would like to. Hopefully, as I'm getting older, I'm correcting that. But I just went to the UK for the first time this past year. I went to Scotland for the World Fantasy Convention, and I got to meet a lot of authors from all over the world. Many of them I was already friends with, but online, right? So, and one thing I got to learn a lot about, just that I have learned over the years from meeting all these people and from all over the world, and then relaying how I feel about things are in Canada for science fiction and fantasy, and learning how things are in the countries that they live in. Um, what is it like to? I know you said you grew up in Russia, and now you live in Estonia. So, what is it like in terms of I guess, the fantasy scene? Like, are there a lot of fantasy conventions? Do fantasy and science fiction authors like get together and speak a lot, either online, or are there like book fairs and conventions where people go to buy books, or authors go to like promote their books and sign books? Is it mostly like online things? Like, how is it in your part of the world for those sorts of things?
For example, in Moscow, it happens on a large scale, and there are about 5 or 6 international book fairs, which reunite a large number of people, not only from Russia, but they used to unite people from the ex-Soviet Union and even from beyond. There are yes, science fiction and fantasy conventions too, with hundreds and thousands of participants. Yeah, everything. Um, Everything science fiction and fantasy related. It used to have a quite a grand scale. At least I don't know what happens there now, after they started the war in Ukraine, sadly. But it used to be, um, as I've already said, quite grand. And in the last decade, fantasy has been more popular in Russia than science fiction, much more popular. And besides, there are some live action role playing games and conventions and parties, and writers participate in them too. I did, for example.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. And it sounds very vibrant. It sounds very rich. Now, you've spoken about Russia. So
Mhm.
now what is Estonia like for that sort of thing? What is it like? I mean, or do you feel more connected there to the Russian scene being where you are in Estonia? Or you feel more connected to the European scene? Like, is it a mix of, like, what's it like in Estonia specifically?
In Estonia, they have a number of book fairs too, but they are smaller in scale, and y- you know, it's more like yes, um, it's more like a small party um, for a small cozy group of people. Um, of course, there are book signatures when some new book is issued, and there is a publishing house in Estonia which often organizes meetings dedicated to Estonia focused books. Yes, the books which are focused on history and culture of Estonia, its language, and it's quite interesting indeed because Estonian capital Tallinn, it inherited German, Swedish culture, Danish culture as well. Um, and here in Estonia, we have a lot of medieval legends. It's nice too. However, I should say that science fiction is not quite popular here.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Estonia is more focused on fairy tales, children's books, and it is also cool. It is also charming. We have amazing artists who make art books together with fairy tale authors.
Wow. Yeah, this sounds phenomenal. I mean, I just like for me, one of my closest writing friends, Eve Kobush, and I've also interviewed her on this channel. She's a brilliant author from Latvia, which of course is next door to Estonia. And hopefully, my wife and I, we plan to, visit her and her husband one day, and or they come to Canada. But with the way she describes it, and through her writing, I've learned so much about Latvia and how beautiful it is, and the culture, and the arts, and the history. It sounds very similar to the things you're talking about. And I always feel like, for me, because my background is in English and medieval literature and history, so many of the settings in my mind would be that I write about would a lot of them are places like Estonia or Latvia with all of that history, and you can walk through a country and see castles, like going to Scotland for Worldcon, seeing castles that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. In Canada, where I live, buildings would only be so old, right? Because of how relatively new a country we are. But then going to places in Europe, you're seeing buildings that are centuries and centuries old. And I think it's just enchanting, right? It's really phenomenal. But it interests me when you say that science fiction is not as popular and it's more fantasy and folklore and fairy tales in Estonia, because you've chosen to write what I believe is a brilliant science fiction book and series, and I really, really enjoyed it. Your book and your first book, of course, I can't comment on the series because that has yet to be concluded. But your first book really focuses on a lot of socio-political issues with things like how we will cope with artificial intelligence, how we will cope with if we go into areas where we can extend our lives, and what are the moral and legal implications for doing that, and so many fascinating topics. Now, I really want to focus on your work, but were there specific motivations and reasons why those were some of the topics you explored in your book? Like, were those things that were like near and dear to your heart? Were those things that you felt that, was because of what was going on in the world? Was it more about you looking towards the future to see where we're going and having concerns, or maybe thinking that things were looking good? And what were some of the reasons why you wrote this book and you had these components, these themes in your book?
First of all, I should say that it all happened by itself. Uh, I was not initially planning covering so many topics, but they were all rooted in my background as a journalist, and I just tried to create a realistic picture of possible future. Uh, and I should stress that I'm not at all afraid of artificial intelligence, because it's always human mind which is more vicious, which is more twisted. And you can see it in my book as well. Um, I used to dive in futurology in such topics as biotechnology and climate change. Of course, I've spent a lot of time covering this subject in the media, blockchain, crypto, and I've created the world of my book focusing on the things that I already dealt with. Um, I say once again, it happened all but by itself.
Wow. I mean, I think what one of the things that there's so many things about your book that fascinated me, but one of the things that fascinated me was that you chose to take a story that occurred over the course of many, many years. And you had different characters that played a role in this story, that some of them had already passed on, at least in terms of how we look at passing on and death, and then others because of the situation. Again, I don't want to give away too many spoilers. They managed to live on, or the essence of their being manages to live on, but the essence of their being has changed and altered over time and over essentially so many different versions of them having gone before. And it's almost like, you you draw a picture, and then the picture is just black and white, and then you color in the picture, and then that's another on another the same picture, but you photocopy it and then you color it in, and then you take that picture and then you enlarge it on another copy, or you shrink it, or the picture gets stained. Someone spilled something on the picture, and now when you copy it again, the stain is there. Or and then you do a 3D holographic image of the picture, and then that's something different. And what that's how I felt about reading your book, that these people, because of the technology in your world, they're who they were originally. That original blank, just plain white piece of paper is so different now, and it was difficult for them in a lot of ways to connect back to that original blank piece of paper. They had become something else, and I thought that was fascinating. Was that something that you considered about in terms of where we're potentially going and how we could preserve, who we are?
Mhm. I see. Let me think how to answer this question. Um, the idea of digital immortality, it has always fascinated me and scared me quite a lot. It's difficult to change the environment so drastically and keep your sane mind. And of course, you won't be anymore the person who you used to be. You will become something else because now you have a connection to any information in the world, and even something you wouldn't want to know as well. And now that you don't have a physical body, and the physical body needs, you have to live for something else and to uh, um, find another goal. So it is interesting to follow and to imagine how one's mind would evolve under these circumstances. And we see that we see a character who holds to her, yes, to her human name, and even somehow managed to find love of her love on the earth, who is mentioned, but whom we don't see in the first book because it will be in the second book. And it is also quite a fascinating character. And she tries to help the Martians on their quest because she wants to keep connected to the human world at any cost, while staying who she is. And yes, I want to underline that she hasn't become a digital form of life on her own consent, and that's why she holds so much to the human world. Though she has a possibility, yes, to put herself to sleep for 1,000,000 years, she still has a hope that something will happen and allow her to reconnect. She's a little bit like Pinocchio, who wants to be a real boy while staying a wooden doll. And it's quite a sad and devastating story, but quite fascinating, quite a fascinating one.
Yeah, and I what that the character you're referring to was brilliant. All your characters were brilliant. I think if I one thing that I loved about your story is that first of all, I could not predict where it was going. The story seemed to be about one thing or several things, and then it went in a completely fascinating and amazing direction. Where I mean, clearly, I could see that when you're focusing on these different characters and you keep moving from character to character, like a totally new character, you can see the threads and the connection over time because large swaths of time elapse between each character's story until we get to one of the final main characters who it's mostly about, him and the circumstances that happen in his story, on Mars. But the one thing I felt in reading these characters' stories was that that feeling of how the lives that they envisioned for themselves and they predicted for themselves did not turn out at all the way that they did, and that in particular the one character who, of course, is essentially the nemesis of the story. when you see his beginnings as a young boy, you couldn't have thought that that he would have evolved in the direction that he did. And of course, his story is very tragic too. But the fascinating one of the most fascinating parts of the story for me was seeing that a connection made as children, how that morphed into adulthood, and that really looking back, it was that connection and the inciting incidences and things that happened between those that really set the course of in some ways humanity, going forward, right? And it was just fascinating to see that. So I want to compliment you on your brilliant characterizations. It was just amazing. But I did not know where the story was going, and I didn't know where all these characters were going to fit in to the overall story until you see later on where their pieces are, right? And I thought that was amazing. Do you have a favorite character? Is the character you spoke about earlier, is that your favorite character in the book? There were so many characters that I absolutely loved. I think that every character had something to contribute to the story that was unique. I think Midori's story, I couldn't get enough of that in the Eastern agglomeration. Like, that was just poignant and sad, but yet hopeful. This little girl who's going through this with her mother. It was just so. But did you have a favorite character?
Yes, I do. It's Violet. Yes, and I haven't used to wear violet braids for some time. Yes, who is unpredictable and unruly, a bit of a trickster, but very kind within his heart, and who sacrificed a lot for knowledge, for the skills he considered necessary, and we find out that it was not in vain, that for years he prepared himself for something, for a big mission without even knowing it. And yes, it happens in real life too. Yes, and perhaps the readers will love Violet even more after the books 2 and 3. Who else? Midori, yes, but Midori's story could be a standalone short story. First, I included into the novel as a part of the world building, to build a larger picture of the work she and Geryon and Wilhelmina lived in. And yes, it is said that she will not appear in the following books by herself, but we will be able to see her legacy in the books, fortunately.
Wow, yeah, and she was Violet. He's an amazing character. I think, again, some of the beauty of your writing and characterization is that your characters, they are realistic and well-rounded. They're not just, except for maybe one perhaps, not just necessarily just good. They're shades of gray, as I think we all are. but your characters are so well fleshed out and well rounded. And I think one of the fascinating things about your characters too is that they all struggled with understanding themselves on some levels and what they wanted. They struggled on some levels with not understanding some of the forces that were surrounding them and that were impacting their lives. But I think one of the quotes that I love from your book, and I apologize, I'm just gonna pull it up here for a moment. It says, "True good may be hidden under the guise of evil, and the creatures of the old world will build a new one with the same mistakes." And also, like part with that, it says, "There are no good or bad people. They may be useful, useless, and dangerous for our cause." And I think, some of that, it's beautiful and it's brilliant. And a lot of that made me think about how in your book, you have people who have, in some ways, been told a story and believing something about a certain person, and whether the evil they did was for a cause, was it justified, and who and what they are. And then you have people who were oblivious to large parts of the entire story. They don't know what's going on, and the world that they think they know is shattered the more truths they understand. And I think those are some of the amazing parts of your story that I loved. Now, did you when you wrote those aspects of your novel, and again, closer to the end, it's like a veil being pulled off, where you don't really know what's going on, but it's ripped away, and then you're left to try and figure out the truth. Especially, our main character near the end is grappling to understand, who do I trust? What's the truth? What really happened? I was led to believe this all my life, but now I see that's not real. Is that how you think we even now are struggling to learn and understand with this proliferation of media? What is the truth? What's really going on? Are the things that are understood, is that really, is that something you were trying to say in your books?
Mhm. Uh, yes, yes, and we should keep in mind that even lies contain a grain of truth. When I was working on this book, I intently made it look like a large puzzle. When you open the box, you see a colorful mess before you, and you say, "What the hell? How do I make a clear picture out of it?" But the more you put effort to connect the pieces of the puzzle, the more you see, the more you enjoy it in the process. You see, yes, I created a variety of characters, each of whom has a part of the knowledge, part of the truth, and as the story is aimed at putting this large picture together, and I think it's a fascinating process.
No, and it was fabulously done. I just wanted to put up a quick comment. This is from the wonderful John A. Douglas, brilliant author and booktuber. Hi, John. Thank you so much for stopping
Hello.
by. John says early morning Sunday stream. He says that he can't stay long. He's at work, but just dropping by a like and a comment. And thank you so much, John, for coming to see Liudmila and dropping a like and a comment. We really appreciate it. So,
Thank you, John.
and John is wonderful. Yes, thank you, John. Um, so part of what I think as well, and on that same vein, Ludmila, in terms of, I talked about this veil being pulled back and learning, and you said something really important there about there's always, in our lives, essentially, there's grains of truth. So near the end of the book, you have these two versions of something, the biggest event in history that happened. So either it is there's one of two versions. It's a natural occurrence, like a storm, or it's a technological war, right? Like what really happened, right? Like what how did we get into the situation? And I think you also made commentaries about political systems, uh, essentially, and forgive me if I oversimplify it, communism versus capitalism.
Yeah.
So, and you very ably, and I think very objectively, show that the positives and the negatives in both of these systems, right? If I were to ask you, in the future, do you think we could still have these varying types of systems, or will it just be really one? Like, because I think, and I'm not saying which one, I'm just saying, can we as a species evolve and continue to exist under these many different systems, do you think?
Um, it's a good question and a very complicated one. So it's we can elaborate it for quite long, but what I'm sure of, it's if there is no alternative to the capitalism that we see today, our planet is doomed. I'm 100% sure of it as an environmental journalist. Yes, and it is possible that the alternatives will appear, not maybe not exactly like I showed in the book, but I see more and more people questioning the existing system and expressing their distrust, their contempt for it, even in the most developed countries like the USA. So, what can I say? We must think, we must engage the most brilliant minds on the earth to just invent an alternative, but to avoid the errors of the past. For example, the tragic errors committed by the USSR in the past, which led to a lot of victims. But what I can say again, it's quite an unpopular opinion. Socialism, and perhaps many people will hate me for this, but I will say that in the 20th century it brought huge progress into the world and into the capitalist countries too. And this is something it is impossible to deny. But of course, it was flawed. It contained serious flaws, and if we had a means to control its it's following progress and evolutions. Maybe if we had artificial intelligence and blockchains that we have now, we could have predicted in advance and avoid some fatal errors. This is what I see. Um, what else? Perhaps I've got too blown away. Um, if we survive until the 22nd century, um, there will be an alternative and some competing systems.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I mean, I look at, and I didn't want to turn this into a political discussion clearly, but I see that. I mean, I'll take for example, I live in Canada,
Mhm.
and Canada is a country that um, I feel has an interesting mix of many systems. Although people would arguably say, well, of course, it's founded on capitalism essentially, but we also have what some countries would consider a heavy reliance on more socialist values, right? Including universal health care and a very robust social safety network for people who are disadvantaged and things like that. So I mean, but yet we combine that with all of the capitalist ethos in terms of big banking systems and monopolies on businesses and things like that. But what I feel about the world, and when I look at your world, is that yeah, it's not going to be one particular system that's gonna succeed. It's gonna be an amalgamation of many different elements from different types of systems evolved into a system that will work for the human beings that exist then, not now. The needs of the human beings then, because as you so eloquently write in your book, it's going to be very different kinds of needs, right? Because right now, for example, we can't conceive in a lot of ways of the existences of the consciousnesses that you have in your book. We conceive of ourselves, of our lives as being pretty linear, living for 60, 70, 80, 90 years and then dying and not living on, unless spiritually you believe that your soul, etc. If you believe in reincarnation, whatever you believe in, we're not thinking about the artificial intelligence aspect necessarily of living on, right? Maybe perhaps as authors, we always feel like, oh, okay, potentially there's some immortality there in what we write, that may transcend our lives and still be around long after we're gone. But we're not necessarily thinking about, the very essence of our thoughts and our brains are living on, right? But in your book, it happens. And then, of course, with that comes all of the ethical and the moral questions that you so aptly grapple with. But what happens when that happens? And what if the person that is living on is not a good person and has a lot of influence on the society as a whole, and this person is living on and propagating horrible things and doing horrible things, and like those are things that a society in the future will have to grapple with, but they will need a really, really good system to
Mhm.
deal with that, right? The systems we have now currently in our existing world aren't capable of coping with the things, those challenges that you write about so well in your books. So I'm hopeful that if we see those kind of realities that you talk about, that we will have a system that suits, that addresses all those things. But before I let you um, talk about that, I want to say that one thing that was very comforting in a way about your book was that you realize But it doesn't matter because even that system is not going to be perfect. So it's whatever we come up with, because we're flawed humans, it's not going to be perfect. It's not, there's not going to be, if we think it's a utopia, the way our character in the last part of the book essentially thought that we'd essentially solved most of the issues, that we were doing okay. And then he realizes, no, we're not, right? Like, it's comforting in a way to know that whatever we come up with, it's going to be flawed in its own way, just like us. We're going to do our best, but it's not going to be perfect. So is that something that you wanted to make us understand in your work, that hey, it's okay, we're gonna mess up, we're not gonna be perfect, but we have to not also fool ourselves that everything is fine?
Maybe initially I didn't have this intention, but you see what you see. Yes, and it's funny that evil person that you were talking about. He also hated the system, and he also wanted to build something else. And his vision of the humanity's future is not so far from that of the Martians. It's quite a funny thing, but he does not tolerate any competition. He wants to control everything himself, and this is why they cannot unite, they cannot be friends. It's no way he may only use them as his own servants, or he'll have them dead.
Yeah. And I think, but one of the scariest and perhaps most prophetic things that you wrote about was that you have uh, and this is, again, I only realized this in the last part of the book, when the story had you made all the links, and now all the connections were being seen in terms of how these characters in the beginning connected with the future, on Mars, and what that looked like and why it was important. And I think so when we get to the last part, and another thing, we'll talk about this later, hopefully, because I do want to address it, because you leave the book on essentially a cliffhanger. And I was like, oh my gosh, what? And then so now you almost have to read book 2 to find out what happens. And I think it was brilliantly done. I know some people don't like cliffhangers. My first book ends on a cliffhanger, and they're like, oh my god, like, but I love cliffhangers. So I love the way you did yours. But as I said, you see from the beginning of the book all these characters. At first, you don't understand how they're all going to fit into the story, but then you see when you get to the end of the book and we're on Mars, how all the storylines weave and interconnect. Now, one part of what I saw and what I loved in your book was the power of a story or a prophecy, or someone saying, this is the vision of the future we need to think about. We need to avoid this version of the future, and trying to set that in motion, and then seeing what the result is many, many, many years later of these ideals. So one thing I got from your book was that it takes a long time to see how these things are going to play out. You're not going to see in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, maybe 100 years how these things play out. But if you look closely, you can see the potential where it could go, for good or for bad, right? For either way. So you said to me that if we don't make certain changes, then we are doomed. But my question to you is that especially based on your book and based on things that I saw, will we make it? Are we going to make it?
Sure.
You think we're going to make it?
Yes.
What gives you hope that we can do it?
Um, what gives me hope? Um, is the overall growth of understanding um, that we need to change. We need to change a lot of things, and the growing opportunities for people to unite, such as technology, social networks, etc., etc. Of course, governments and corporations will control social networks and try to control people's minds, and we see a lot of it in Russia right now. And I think in the USA it's the same thing. However, technology always advances to circumvent censorship, and it's quite a good news. And we have some such people as um, Greta Thunberg. Though I don't agree with her on certain things, but
Yeah.
it's quite important that she's a young leader. She has the influence over millions
Yes. Yes.
in the West and beyond. And we need more such leaders now and in the future. Luckily, we have them.
Yeah.
What else? What concerns me that today the number of young people is declining, and this is a great trouble, because the young people are um, the propulsive force of change. But right now, I don't have any idea of what to do with it.
Yeah. No, I understand. And you mentioned you have a young daughter, young child. I have grandchildren, that are probably some of them the same age as your child, and I look at all them and I say, what kind of future are they going to inherit, right? What are they going to, how are they going to cope with the issues that they're going to face, that of course that previous generations such as ours have caused and left them to sort out in this world, right? So if there is a situation as in depicted in your book, either essentially a global conflict that causes that kind of chaos and destruction, or because of climate change and what we've done to the environment, creates a natural disaster that causes that, how are they going to, because they're the ones that are going to be left to manage that, right? And hopefully, with that type of leadership, like for example, with the Greta Grunbergs and with the people who are looking to truly, revolutionize the way we think about certain things, the way we approach, especially how we approach certain things. Thinking is one thing. We can think all we want, but then it's putting that into action and approaching things in a certain way. And your characters do that. They don't just think, they take action and they approach and they influence and so that's what it's going to come down to. And also the courage to face certain truths, right? Because no one wants to face some of the inevitable truths that we are facing as a society, because it's not pleasant, right? It's not hopeful. It's not, but your characters display the courage to do that, which I thought was amazing. At least some of them. So quickly, I'm just going to put up a hello from Shad Zaman. Hi, Shad. Thanks for coming by to see Liudmila. Shad is an amazing person, great friend of the channel. So, hi. Had the pleasure, of course, of meeting Shad in person. He is a great supporter of the writing community. So, always great to see Shad in the chat. So Liudmila, now, one thing that I found fascinating, so many fascinating things about your work, but um, let's get to Mars. So that the last section of the book. So you have this world now that after events have transpired on Earth that has become the main human, at least to them, the main human colony or outpost. And you see the different political systems, like the ones in certain places that are very different, and they are there's like a fragile piece between these systems, but it's all you can see it's bubbling and waiting potentially to explode. And you also have people that when they step outside the boundaries of the system, invariably the system tries to punish them for it or bring them back. So when you getting to the part of Mars, and I didn't realize, of course, till we got there, that everything was leading up to this, right? Because you're seeing one of the brilliance of your novel is that you're seeing the world develop and you're seeing the world going a certain path, but you don't know where it's going. But then when you kind of get there, when you arrive, you look back and realize, oh, okay, well, if I would have been paying closer attention, I would have seen how we got here in the first place, right? And I thought that was brilliantly done. When we get to Mars and you have these different systems where whenever people try to step outside or do something different, or be essentially what I would call what we would terminize a maverick, or a rebel against the system, or someone who is trying to create change, do something unique. Invariably, the system stops it on punishment. So you talked about leadership, and you talked about climate change warriors and warriors for political change. So how do those people? How can those people, and every generation has always had them, right? These people who are willing to step out and challenge the system, be punished for it, and pay a personal cost, etc. But they still keep going. How are we able in the future that you envision, or in any potential futures that might happen? How are we going to be able to keep finding those people to do that, and how are those people going to continue to be able to do what they do so that we can reach that, so that we can survive, essentially? Do you think, how are those people going to be able to make it? Because I think what we see today is that those people are finding it harder and harder to do that.
These people, okay, I'll try to put it simply. In my opinion, it's essential to educate the people around you, because one person is not much of a fighter. In my books, it happens, but you understand that in Mars they have small communities like villages. Yes, where even one person is enough. But when we see today's society, um, there must be large groups of people who require change, make a change. Okay. For example, those Amazon workers going on strike. Perhaps you've heard about it.
Yeah.
Yes, and what if there are millions and billions people like this? and you've seen that they don't even need to fight. They need to go on strike, and things start to move on. We have we have a number of results already. So it's education, education, and education. Right now, yes, we cannot do without it, and right now, society is unfortunately not ready for major changes because people are passive. They are um, highly on TikTok, Instagram, etc., etc. Um, Perhaps they are too stressed by their job to just think about the state of the world and their own rights, but um, the leaders will need to push them and
Well,
spread
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yes, no. I was just enthusiastic about your point. No, I totally agree. We need more Rosa Parks. We need more Nadia.
knowledge.
Sorry,
Exactly.
we need more Nadia Tola Konakovas.
Mhm.
We need more Greta Gunbergs. We need more people who, um, if for nothing else, we need their voice to get us to inspire us to become, because everyone can be a leader in their own way, and maybe we're not capable of creating Pussy Riot, right? We're not able to have the resolve to sit at the back of the bus no matter what happens. We don't have um, the ability to stand up at a very, very young age on a world stage and talk about how we're destroying our planet. However, we can all do something in our own way, right, to be that leader that's going to help save us. I think, and that's a very encouraging vision of the future. And I think you really highlight that well in the book, because all of the positive characters, they lead in a very different way. You know, you have a young girl who's struggling to survive, to eat. Her mother has an addiction that it's killing herself slowly. She's neglecting her child. The child has to cope on their own, but is still trying to save the mother, not just so that the child can survive, but because they love their mother. And but then she's a hero. So we have all these heroes in your books, and in their own way, they're trying to do something positive. They're not all capable of doing the same thing. You have heroes that are much more privileged, they have a much more affluent position in their society, but they're trying to do these things that overall are going to help. And I think that's all we can ask for out of us as humans, to do our own little part. And I love that about your book, that was one of the things that you displayed. So kudos to you for doing that. Can you tell us a bit, as we're winding down, about what the plans are for the series, the next books? Is this going to be a trilogy, a longer series, a shorter series? Do you have more books planned in this universe, in Geryon cycle?
Uh, sure. The second book is being translated right now, so we can expect it in this year. Um, Perhaps by Halloween. And the third book, I'm working on it, and perhaps we can expect more books, but I haven't haven't even started. I have I have some things in mind because there is at least one character whose story I would like to elaborate on, but First, I must publish the basic 3 books of the series.
Okay, so it's going to be essentially a trilogy, so essentially 3 books. Okay. And well, I'm very excited to read more of your work. I truly enjoyed your book. Um, I again thank you so much for reaching out to me and be willing to offer me an advanced reading copy so I can read it. It was definitely a book worth reading. I can't wait to read more from you. Um, just for those of you who are joining late or have not watched from the beginning, again, we have Liudmila BRUS. She is a science fiction author. She lives in Estonia. Her book uh, and the series surrounding it is what we're talking about. So just in terms of the series itself, it's Geryon's Code series, and the specific book that I read is No Life But Immortality. Again, the author is Liudmila BRUS. Liudmila, can you tell us where to find you on social media? Like if people want to learn more about you as an author, about your books and your writing, where can they find you in the social media space?
I've got Instagram. I've got Steemit. I've given you the link, I think. Mhm. Now I've got Twitter too.
Yes, and I've put the links down in the description of this video.
Yes, and
Um,
the name of the second novel is The Orphan Dearth, and yes, and the action will take place on the Earth.
okay, okay.
Yes, we will finally see what it looks like after the global blackout, half a century later.
Wow, I cannot wait. This sounds very exciting. And again, you're a wonderful author. I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. Just as well, before we sign off, can you tell us where we can buy your books?
You can buy them on Amazon. Now exclusively on Amazon, but I'm considering other options as well.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. And finally, as we're signing off, so we know this is going to be trilogy. We can expect to read more from you in the future. Are there any other writings about that you've done that we need to be aware of, like short stories or magazines? Or you've said that you're a journalist, so by trade, or you have been a journalist by trade. So are there articles that we can read that you've wrote in newspapers or magazines, etc.? Even if they're specifically they may be in Russian, or they may be like you've done them in Estonia. Is there places you can direct us?
Um, okay, I've got some short stories and articles on my Steemit.
Okay.
Yes, and in Russian there is an online magazine +1. Um, it's largely focused on environmental issues. Um, One can find my articles and interviews there.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Well, and those are all things that I recommend you check out if you want to find out more about Liudmila BRUS. I definitely recommend, especially for you. We have lots of sci-fi buffs out there. Check out Geryon's Code series. Check out No Life But Immortality. When I post my Goodreads review, I'll put a link directly in that review to this interview with Liudmila, who's been so kind and generous and graced me with her time, of which I am extremely honored. So thank you so much. It has been a real pleasure and a treat for me to do that. So thank you. I cannot wait to read more of your work. You left me on a cliffhanger, so now I have no choice but to find out what happened in book 2. So I
I'll
need to
do my
know
best, I promise.
I need to know what happens now. I need to know what happens to these characters. So, but again, it was wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who joined in the chat, for example, John A. Douglas and Shad, who are always so supportive and wonderful friends of the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by to see Liudmila, to learn more about her work and about her. For everyone who's going to watch the replay, thank you so much. Everyone, the people in the chat and replay, you are what makes this type of long form content amazing, because we get to sit down and speak with people, wonderful creatives such as Liudmila, for a long time. You get to learn a lot about them, and you have a lot more impetus in terms of buying their work, and you get to see kind of behind the page of who the author is.
Oh, Anna, my good friend.
Sorry, what is that? Overdrive? That's your friend?
Yes.
Fantastic. Overdrive, thank you so much for coming by. We really appreciate it. It means a lot. And Overdrive says, thanks for the interview. Nice to see and hear you for Liudmila, and highly recommend Liudmila's books, as do I. Highly recommend Liudmila's books. There's so many gems out there that people may not be aware of, brilliant books that, a lot of people need to read, more people need to read, and Liudmila's is definitely one of them. So thank you, Overdrive, for stopping by to support Liudmila.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.